Thank you all. We continue now with the presentation by Dr. Mellie Green from Australian Catholic University. The presentation is titled Bletherbox: How does a dialogic approach support student engagement in reading for enjoyment? Mel, you have half an hour, and then we have 15 minutes for discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am thinking I'm here for some light relief right now, so please get a cup of tea and sit back and enjoy my presentation. I'm going to share screen. Okay, can you see my screen clear? Can you see my slide clearly? Great, thank you. So good morning, welcome friends. I'm Dr. Mellie Green. I currently lecture at the School of Education at ACU, but I'm about to move to Southern Cross University. In gathering here this morning, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which I'm presenting here in beautiful Brisbane, the Turrbal people. I pay my respect to their ancestors and their descendants. I also pay respect to Indigenous elders past, present and emerging across all the lands on which we meet this morning. My PhD thesis submitted earlier this year is entitled For the Love of Good Stories. It narrates the work of 4 very passionate teachers and their classroom practices in the engagement of their students in a reading for enjoyment pedagogy. In my presentation, I will provide an overview of policy and research. I will describe some theoretical underpinnings of a reading for enjoyment pedagogy, explain my approach to writing about this, and provide a playful performance to illustrate the dialogic practice and impact of book blether. Reading for enjoyment is a vital right for children. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child contains clear ratification of this. Article 17 relates children's rights to access material aimed at the promotion of his or her well-being, and in achieving this, it encourages the production and dissemination of children's books. In the Australian context, the Australian Curriculum English across all year levels from prep, foundation to 10 states that students engage in a variety of texts for enjoyment. It claims in 2 of 4 aims to develop students' aesthetic appreciation and enjoyment of literature. My study specifically focused on teachers' work with reading texts in which the primary purpose is aesthetic, as specified in the Year 3 to Year 10 year level description. The Alice Springs and Parntway Education Declaration of 2019 sets out the national vision for education and the commitment of Australian governments to improving educational outcomes. It emphasises the vital role education plays in children's aesthetic development, and yet there is a dearth of research around this. According to aesthetician Professor Bence Nane, studies have found that people's taste in art objects, such as books, is deemed to be more important to their sense of self than moral, political, or even religious views. In short, Nane argues that our aesthetic preferences are how we identify ourselves. Sorry, I'm battling a sore throat here. Many decades of empirical research demonstrate the myriad of benefits of students' reading enjoyment. Unsurprisingly, Reading enjoyment is an influential factor in improved reading attainment. The reciprocal relationship between reading enjoyment and reading achievement has been described as the Matthew effect by Stanovich, 1986, by which children exposed to positive experiences of reading from a young age enjoy greater reading habits and academic achievement. The connection between reading attainment and enjoyment is so strong that the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, PISA tests include measurement of both and state that students who read daily for enjoyment score the equivalent of 1.5 years of schooling better than those who do not. Research has also demonstrated that enjoyment of reading is a major contributory factor in wider academic success. Significantly, research findings show that students reading for enjoyment is a foremost predictor of academic attainment at age 16. Reading for enjoyment contributes to personal and social development. Studies have recognized the significant power of reading engagement to enhance emotional literacy and empathy. Reading for enjoyment is a significant factor in social and economic mobility, narrowing the attainment gap between disadvantaged and privileged students. Forming the lifelong habit of reading for enjoyment has been associated with broad societal benefits, providing a remedy for rising problems such as loneliness and dementia. Yet, in the current context, it has been sidelined for perfunctory reading practices. So I used Dewey's 1934 seminal theory of aesthetic experience to make sense of a reading for enjoyment pedagogy. According to Dewey, as humans, we are driven by an inherent urge for experience, which impels our continual structuring and restructuring of knowledge of the world. All experience arises from interaction of the self in the physical and social environment. Dewey's theory describes the human desire for experience on an affective level and how reading literature satisfies an innate aesthetic need. As educators, then, we need to shape environmental and social conditions most conducive to enjoyment of reading experiences that lead to growth. Professor Eugene Matazov's 2009 work on ontological engagement is helpful to understanding how reading is currently taught and learned. Ontologically oriented reading engagement is volitional. It is mostly learner-led. It draws on students' reading preferences and emotionalized experiences of reading, of literature. Non-engagement, then, more often occurs when reading lessons are teacher-led. Typically, reading involves set texts with on-demand comprehension tests. Disengagement happens when students' lack of interest manifests as indifference and defiance. In classroom practice, these students renounce or refuse participation in classroom discussion. For my thesis, I have departed radically in academic writing. DRAW is an acronym for a HDR writing community established by Professor Liz McKinley for those of us interested in post-qualitative research writing. I wanted to create a doctoral dissertation about reading enjoyment that is, in itself, an enjoyable read. In their advocation, I draw on children's books. Today's presentation is playfully and provocatively penned as palimpsests readily drawn from one of my most favourite children's read-alouds, Gordon's Got a Schnooky by Lisa Shanahan and Wayne Harris. This picture book tells the sassy tale of a gorilla called Gordon and his darling Schnooky, that is, his security blanket. Although ridiculed and disregarded at first, all the animals of the zoo awake eventually to the significance of a Schnooky. It begins, one evening, the animals of the zoo could not sleep. This endearing and enlightening story allegorically categorizes my research work with a beautiful classroom teacher named Belinda and her dialogic approach to an effective and affective Reading for Enjoyment Pedagogy with her class of 23 mostly chatty Year 3 children. So I'll now proceed with a palimpsestic performance and hope you enjoy the read aloud representation of this particular findings chapter. Belinda's got a bletherbox. One dog-tired, data-driven day, all the education stakeholders could not imagine otherwise. Until Belinda is coming, pronounced the PhD candidate. Belinda is coming, agreed the academic advisory team. Belinda is coming, endorsed the Human Research Ethics Committee. Belinda is coming, legitimised the University Chancellor. Belinda is coming, permitted the Department Director General. Belinda is coming, remarked the Minister for Education. Whoopee, woohoo, yee-haw, yippity, woo-hee. Belinda is coming, Belinda is coming. The minister stopped spruiking and gazed at the PhD candidate. Who is Belinda? He asked. Don't you know? Replied the earnest researcher. If I knew, sniped the minister, would I be asking you? She is a classroom teacher, a teacher who reads and a reader who teaches. She's a big book lover. I'm partnering with her in a narrative inquiry so we can share stories of students' reading engagement. Whoop-de-doo, said the Minister for Education, somewhat nonchalantly. Later that night, the researcher lay wide awake. Her thoughts were full of Dewey's aesthetic theory and the focus of her PhD research, the Australian curriculum English demand for students to engage in reading for enjoyment, and more specifically, from Year 3 onwards, in texts in which the primary purpose is aesthetic. I hope Belinda takes seriously her vital role in promoting students' social, emotional, moral, spiritual, and aesthetic development and well-being, she wished. I hope real reading of real books is a significant part of a daily classroom routine, she whispered. I hope her reading desires are rooted in longing for students' experience vitality, she willed. And eventually, she fell asleep and dreamt lovely dreams about a passionate, sensitive, and delightful classroom reading teacher. The next morning, the researcher worked alongside Belinda, who smiled beautifully at her and all the Year 3 students. Belinda flexed her reading pecs. She bulged her book-lifting biceps. She meaningfully held up a high-quality children's book and engagingly read aloud. I love this book, expressed a child. The plot is gripping, conveyed another. Please, can we keep going? Articulated the entire class. They launched into deep discussion about maidens and Amazons, tricksters and fools, overcoming monsters, quests and comedies. The researcher observed and recorded. Oh, look, she marvelled. Belinda's got a bletherbox. Sorry. Belinda's got a bletherbox, she told her academic advisory team. Belinda's got a bletherbox, she told the Department Director General. Belinda's got a bletherbox, she told the Minister for Education. The minister momentarily stopped his dartification of children and scrutinised the researcher. What's a bletherbox? He probed. Don't you know? Asked the researcher. If I knew, countered the Minister for Education, would I be asking you? A bletherbox, advised the researcher, is a metaphorical space for teachers to mediate an ontologically oriented, dialogic, reading for enjoyment pedagogy. How do you employ this bletherbox? Surveyed the minister. It's where you make space for and encourage students to engage in informal book talk, clarified the researcher. Book blether is a highly significant yet somewhat undervalued aspect of children's reading engagement. Although the term originated in Scotland as a term used for chatter amongst friends, in UK education settings, book blether has been gaining traction and momentum through the research work of Professor Theresa Kremen, and also the Open University's research-rich Pedagogy's Reading Projects repository. Apart from its very pleasing elocution and alliterate resonance with the word book, this reference, book blether, to the genial, sociable nature of real-life book club discussions positions this important classroom activity perfectly. Whenever students feel moved by their reading and undergoing of a story to the point of aesthetic response, they take to their metaphorical bletherbox and they share their thoughts, feelings, ideas, and ideals with others. They reveal emotional reactions to evocative reading matters. In schools where staff and senior leaders share their reading lives and blether about books, and thus about life, a sense of connection and community develops. Can we do tests with it? Measure effect size? Harvest data? Quantified the minister. Not really, qualified the researcher. You are anti-establishment, reckoned the minister, bolstered by his children testing, effect size measuring, and data harvesting henchmen. They just laugh themselves silly over Belinda and her bletherbox. The researcher was embarrassed and belittled. At schools all around the land, teachers were ordered to impose inane, mind-numbing reading practices, which drowned great books with sticky notes, double-entry journals, and marginalia, and valued the development of test takers over development of lifelong readers, required students to read tedious texts and extract futile facts, ignored the importance of reading enjoyment despite it being a clearly stated curriculum entitlement. The children grew to hate reading. The reading results showed it. The statistics testified a long, flat line. The minister could not understand this reader-sidal pandemic. He tried his best to increase the global ranking, but the results remained unchanged. The more the minister pressed for the dubious drivers of increased hyper-individualized accountability, the more the children disengaged. The more the children disengaged, the more the data set stagnated. Before long, the minister was so troubled, he began to condemn universities for their dogma and teaching fads. The universities then threatened to close their education faculties in the face of heavily prescribed government reforms. The department director generals dictated data targets to force the figures upwards. The perplexed school principals stipulated synthetic phonics packages to escalate effect sizes. And the poor scapegoated teachers packed up in exhaustion as public blame mounted and their vocational hearts broke. Finally, one day, the researcher shared her story of beautiful Belinda, the teacher who reads and reader who teaches, and of her bletherbox, the wonderful metaphorical space from which she enacted the socially interactive Dialogic reading for enjoyment pedagogy activity, Book Blether, in which she created reading interest, inquiry, and imaginative thinking, and efficaciously improved students' aesthetic perception, expressions of reading experience, and of course, Sasha, more meaningful human relations. Belinda's bletherbox had significantly increased the students' love of literature through the power of peer recommendation, and of course, this increased NAPLAN reading results too. the minister read the full thesis story of Belinda and her Bletherbox, of her reading role modelling, her students' voicing of reading pleasures, of the power in peer recommendations and informal book talk, and the huge transformative potential of book blether. He leapt to his feet. He jumped up on his boardroom chair and placed a call to the Department Director General. "This thesis is first class," he raved. "I love it. Its characters are based in classroom settings and truly engaged in brilliant ontologically oriented teaching and learning. It's the answer to all of our problems." With a mighty laugh, he looked down. He was actually living Belinda's research legacy. He was standing on his very own Bletherbox, blethering about a book he'd enjoyed. "Grab yourself some good books and a Bletherbox," shouted the minister. "Grab yourself some good books and a Bletherbox," shouted the Department Director General. "Grab yourself some good books and a Bletherbox," shouted the University Chancellor. "Grab yourself some good books and a Bletherbox," shouted the school principals. "We sure will," replied the teachers. "Whoopee, woohoo, yee-haw, yippity, woo-hee," cheered the students. All across the land, shelves were cleared of comprehension blackline masters, required reading lists, and benchmark-levelled restrictions. In their place, classroom library collections were carefully curated with high-quality, high-interest books, books that reflected students' realities and represented new ideas too. Students' impulsions were cleverly directed towards volitional reading and all the many pleasures of the text enjoyed. Bletherboxes were metaphorically placed at the centre of classroom practice. Teachers enthusiastically designed and implemented cumulative sequences of weekly lessons devoted entirely to the delights of book blether, informal book talk. Back in Belinda's classroom, Belinda grinned. She flexed her reading pecs. She bulged her book-lifting biceps. She pummeled her chest and roared. "Oh, look, see them moving willingly, pulling the books out without prompting and engaging merrily, happily, and voluntarily, not because I said they have to, but because they want to. Everyone is reading." From that day on, Belinda was hailed a hero, for the students were never disengaged again. The Matthew effect kicked in. Because children enjoyed reading more, they read more. The more they read, the more books they enjoyed. The global reading results skyrocketed. The students, confident in their personal reading identity, returned to their Bletherboxes to voice their literary opinions, preferences, and peer recommendations. And with all the doing and undergoing of reading for aesthetic purpose, the rest of the planet's problems slowly began to be addressed. From Belinda's legendary Bletherbox, student engagement in reading for enjoyment ultimately saved the world. Whoopee, woohoo, yee-haw, yippity woo-hee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mel. Wonderful, wonderful presentation. If you want to ask a question or comment, please use raise hand button in your reactions menu. Anna?
Thank you, Mel. This was just enjoyable and wonderful. And now to our Bletherbox. I learned so much from your doctoral dissertation. And also, Thank you for the different genre of presentation, which is so enjoyable. It's really like a children's book. And I wanted to just ask you, why did you want to use that genre, and how did it change what you were doing for yourself?
Oh, thank you, Anna. That's a good question, and it took me over a year to find the answer to it myself. I'm a primary teacher of 25 years. I've been a teacher librarian for 20 of those. You know, I really have seen the magic happen in terms of children's reading, and most importantly, talking about their reading with their friends. And then, of course, you know, I've seen the implementation of growth targets that we've had to set in terms of children's reading levels, the benchmark levels, which has seen real books replaced with the leveled schemes of books. And this is kind of it. And then I've actually been a curriculum leader in a school for 5 years, and I've seen the data flatline, and I felt like I understood, or at least had some understanding of what was going on. And that's what took me to my PhD research. And then in writing up the research, I really struggled with finding a narrative voice. And what I wanted more than anything was not to kind of slam this report down on the minister's desk, you know, but you know, in discussion with my academic advisory team, to create a thesis that is inviting, it's invitational and inspirational to the, you know, the thousands and thousands of pre-service teachers who are graduating every year into the classroom and standing in front of children who perhaps don't identify as readers, who've never felt this love of reading themselves. I needed it to be inspirational and invitational for them. And so it kind of made sense then. I need my thesis to be an enjoyable read. I'm promoting children's literature always. You know, I'm an activist in that. And so most of my presentations, I play with palimpsests from different children's books. I thought this one worked for Book Blether itself, that informal book talk. And it was just, I guess, serendipity that my supervisor, Professor Liz McKinley, in my second year of my PhD, started this writing community, and we now have hundreds of members in it. Where were we? Here in my drawer, my desire to draw, this slide here. She posted an invitation to writing camp, and there were about 10 of us who attended this 2-week writing camp, and you know, read a lot of researchers' writing in a post-qualitative way. And the 10 of us, I'm pleased to say, have now graduated, and we are spreading the love. We have a book, a draw guidebook, coming out next year with Routledge. And yeah, but we have a Facebook group with hundreds of HDR candidates in it who want to write this way. But for me, it was that connection with reading enjoyment. And I had tried and tried, but that narrative voice thing wasn't working to write in a more traditional academic, scholarly way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eugene.
You muted.
Thanks, Anna. It's always a challenge to notice that. So thank you, Mel, for very interesting presentation. And I really want to kind of encourage and congratulate you for experimenting with academic genre of research, and which in a way, what's interesting about that fits to your presentation, the content and form, they kind of fit to each other. And but what I want us to think about, to invite to thinking about that, you actually really disrupting conventional schooling in the sense that, the children, in a way, themselves defined what's interesting for them to read, right? And you can actually think about as a metaphor or maybe model, stronger than metaphor in this case, for education itself. If you think about that, so the kids will decide what to study, not only what to read. But not only kids, actually students. And that's a very interesting thing. But if you take it seriously, you will start running into trouble with yourself, not with the schools, but with yourself. Let me tell you where they are. It's coming from your enthusiasm, which I want to problematize. Like, for a long time, I thought that whatever I teach is the most important thing for my students, because I teach that, because I have my passion and whatever. I want everybody to engage ontologically and fascinate them in the subject that I'm teaching. And later I started challenge that myself because it's kind of, it's almost reminds me Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his Emile, this pedagogical novel, when he wrote, which actually defines progressive education. And I start challenging this notion of progressive education. And when he wrote something that students, this is in my, sorry for my, paraphrase, because I don't remember exactly how it was said, but something like that students should think that it's his desires, but actually it's your desires. By the way, by your, he means, of course, progressive teacher. And it's very manipulative in my view. And this enthusiasm, like with the idea that, first of all, this idea that all students love to read or would like to love to read or whatever, it's not true. There are great people who don't like to read. And not because somebody did something wrong in their childhood, and then it's a human. Humans, part of the human. Actually, it's not only humans. It's probably all biologically true. We specializing. We're not universal. Not everybody loves to read, and it doesn't mean there is something wrong with them. Not everybody likes to draw, and it's not something about. Not everybody likes to sing. Not everybody likes to dance. And this our desire to make everybody dance, I think it's very wrong. By the way, even when we're successful, because our focus, our passions, and our everything are not limited. It's limited. And while we're doing something, we're not doing something else. And that's a good question. Like, should you really contaminate everybody with love to read? Maybe. I don't know. That's an interesting question. Or you should actually help students to define what they like. And it's true, explore that, which could be exploring readings as well, of that reading that you're talking about, which is great readings. I in this case, I don't, what I really value that you're creating this possibility in schools when that free readings and enjoyable readings and self-selecting readings is possible. I think that's great. For me, the problem starts when it's become total, that everybody must do it. And that's become, everybody needs to love reading. And I think that's wrong. It's not everybody needs to love reading. And I think this is, if you look at this model, it's actually what tells you if it's okay for people to read. For example, you would probably agree that it's okay not that some people don't like fictional readings and they will choose biographies. You see, that will be okay probably for you, right? But I don't know how much it's okay for you to say it's okay not to love to read and not to spend time on that self-selective reading. You see, that's the limit. And I think, in my view, why not to go further and to say, yes, it is also okay. And this diversity of the different approaches, different voices, yes, some people will, it's okay for them not to learn math even. I just was listening to a wonderful interview with wonderful Russian writer, and he actually make a very interesting comment. He's coming his 80s. For Mikhail, I can tell you it's Alexander Guinness. And he said something very important things. He said, my worst time in life was school life, when I was learning trigonometry and all bullshit that I never used in all my life. And it distracted me from 5 years old, I wanted to be a writer. And he would love Mel to be in your students as he was little boy, because that's what his dream, to choose what to write and to read and maybe to do something else, but not trigonometry.
Yeah.
And we might need to say that's okay, rather than think, oh, how to fascinate little Alexander Guinness in trigonometry. Because I'm excited myself about trigonometry, which is, by the way, is true, personally. That's, by the way, I just love trigonometry. But, that's maybe we should just say, that's part of this exploration. Like, where is your heart leads to? It's encouraged to try things maybe, but to the point. And then to say, it's okay. So I just want to bring that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Mel, please.
Thank you, Eugene. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be here and talking to you about my interpretation of your work. And I guess the teacher librarian in me, here's you as a little boy who's interested in trigonometry, and I will go and find a book about trigonometry that you will enjoy reading. But I'm playfully jesting. I understand. I do, that reading isn't for everybody. But I guess I'm trained as a classroom teacher to take the curriculum, and my craft is to make that interesting to the students. To kind of find a hook, to get them interested. And yeah, I just have to keep working this way.
Thank you very much for the answer. We know that children learn the best, or actually any learners learn the best, when they meet and surrounded by teachers who are on fire for what they're teaching.
Mm.
So there's no doubt that you're on fire. Mark, please ask the question.
Yeah, thanks, Mikhail. Yeah, Mel, thank you so much. I was so honored to hear that genre of presentation. I never even thought that existed, but I'm amazed. So
Thank you.
to get into that. Yeah. I actually had a question. Because I think I heard you describe a little bit about the self-initiated aspect of learning the enjoyment in reading. At least that was one of the characteristics that I thought I remembered seeing in that interesting phrase that you had, which I don't remember what it was now. Something about the enjoyment of reading. I want to say readophilia, but I don't think that was it. But it was something like that.
Or read aside. Read aside is the problem.
Read aside is what kills it, right?
Yes.
And I was just curious, if you could speak more about that, because I was thinking about self-initiation and my own desire, and maybe it was something Eugene said about dancing, which got me to raise my hand. I have always hated dancing my entire life, in fact, to the point where it was phobic and fear-driven. I couldn't even imagine myself on a dance floor. It would just scare me beyond belief. And now, for whatever reason, I love to do it. In fact, it's something I do every week on Sunday. Why, I don't know. And it's a mystery to me, actually. The mystery of the self-initiation, of the desire to want to do that, which came out of me, perhaps through, an exploration, I would say, of my own desires. But I think it was through other people and through interactions I've met with people, and in my own kind of self-discovery of myself. At some point I just said, I want to dance, and it's something I really like to do, and I feel supported and nurtured in that. So I was just curious, if you could describe a little bit more about how self-initiated or self-education, whatever we call it, the drive to do something for oneself is connected to your understanding of reading for enjoyment?
That's a big question, Mark, a very big question. And funnily enough, I teach pre-service teachers from the first year to the fourth year of their Bachelor of Education, and tell them all that they are dance teachers in the primary context. We're dance teachers, we're maths teachers, we're English teachers, we're all learning area teachers. And see lots of them pull faces at that a notion of being a dance teacher. But in answer to your question, I think it's interesting in Britain, where Professor Teresa Cremin's work really has taken hold, and there is a reading for pleasure movement. And I, in 2018, as part of my research, went to England and attended one of her conferences and went to the Centre for Literacy Education, CLPE, and went to the Guardian newspaper is working in partnership. So I went to a few conferences, and there is, a real interest in from teachers in reading for pleasure. And in Australia, our curriculum states reading for enjoyment. And it kind of niggled me for a little while. And I talked to Professor Teresa Cremin about it to see what her take is on. I was reading Roland Barthes' work on reading for pleasure and reading for enjoyment, and also obviously reading Dewey's work, and seeing pleasure as more recreational, relaxation, and enjoyment has this educative value. It is transactionary. And Teresa Cremin kind of very cleverly, we went round and round in circles in this conversation, and then came to a point of agreement, which was that it's volitional, that children come to the reading volitionally. They'll take a book off the shelf because they want to. And that's the aim of this work, whether it is reading for pleasure, reading for enjoyment. It is about them, wanting to, having a desire to. And Dewey's work tells us that, we have this innate aesthetic hunger, all of us. It's an impulsion that makes us get up and interact in our environments. I guess I'm working from a premise that particularly picture books can satisfy this aesthetic hunger. And if I practice the art of getting the right book in the right child's hands, there's a lot of criticism in Australia of Andy Griffiths and Dav Pilkey and their kind of crude, lewd children's books. But as a teacher librarian, I see that as a start to this. And if particularly little boys want to read about Captain Underpants, well, that's okay. We will move them on to other things. But it's about volition. I think that's where it starts, and them wanting to, and coming into the school library or, the classroom library, whatever it is in your context, excited and wanting to have a look at the books. So a love of books, as much as a love of reading, I think is going to help in that self, that volitional will, desire to read. And then to develop a reading identity, to know in the Australian curriculum English, the scope and sequence definitely starts in the early years with reading for entertainment, and it's year 3 in which the primary purpose is aesthetic. So we start with entertainment, and in the English curriculum, you'll see that they develop preferences in their reading. And then in year 2, they discuss their preferences with others and listen to others' opinions. and I think that's a really lovely aspect of our curriculum, to support teachers who are non-readers, who don't identify as readers. That this kind of plots the way for doing that work of developing in students the desire to read. I hope that answers your question, Ma.
Thank you very much, Mel. We have the last question from Anna, and I would like to have both the question and the answer as short as possible, because we have to go into a break, and then we change the Zoom room. Anna, please.
Okay, just a small comment to connect back to Sasha Sidorkin's presentation. I think that the relationship of a teacher in a conventional school to children and of a librarian to children is a very different quality relationship. And that's worth also exploring, because I don't think that the librarian necessarily counts on captive audience, but has to fight for the audience all the time, while the teacher does not. The teacher has a power of ordering children what to do, while the librarian probably just has a power of attracting children to, and in that sense, it's a completely different relationship. And I think in that sense, maybe the librarian relationship is more dialogical, because it's not power driven in the same sense as teacher. That's just a comment.
That's a very interesting comment, Anna. I guess I'm very fortunate in working in a system in which the position is teacher librarian. You have to be a qualified, experienced teacher with at least 5 years classroom experience to be a teacher librarian, and then have a qualification as a librarian on top of that. So it's a very well respected, and I think both the students and colleagues appreciate that. But I understand in other contexts that's not the case, and you're absolutely right. It is a very different relationship.
Thank you very much for your answer. So this concludes this part of our last session. And those who would like to listen to the last presentation and would like to attend the closing of the conference, please follow the link that I've just posted in the chat box. We will start in 12 minutes with the last presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.